In the dictionary, a trade can be defined as an exchange, something for something else, typically as a commercial transaction. Sometimes in the NFL, there are fair trades where both parties were happy with what they got, but most of them are imbalanced, and for some teams, franchise-altering swings and misses. Let's look at every NFL team's worst trade, and that's coming up right after this. Championship Sunday is here. That means after this weekend, we'll have to wait 2 more weeks for NFL football. Well, better get in on the action now. Use my code 5points and all first-time users on PrizePicks will receive an instant deposit match up to $100. If you deposit $69, PrizePicks will give you $69. Nice. What you do is pick 2 to 6 players and then decide if they will get more or less of their PrizePick projection. And you can win 25 times your money on any entry. On Sunday, I have Patrick Mahomes, more pass yards, Lamar Jackson, more pass yards, and Jared Goff, more pass yards. PrizePicks is also always running new and exciting promotions like Taco Tuesday, Demons and Goblins, and Flex Fridays, and more. Your money is safe and can be easily withdrawn. Collect those winnings. And don't forget, these are the eligible states. So after this video, first-time users go to prizepicks.com or download the app from the link below and use my code 5points for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Again, that's promo code 5points on PrizePicks. These are ranked from least bad to most baddest. Let's get into it. Arizona Cardinals. Following the retirement of Kurt Warner, the Cardinals desperately needed a QB. So in 2011, the Cards traded Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie and a second rounder to the Eagles for backup Kevin Kolb. DRC was a serviceable corner for 10 years, and Kevin Kolb was shit on a stick in the desert, starting only 14 games over a 2-year span. Miami Dolphins. In 2007, the Pats trading for Wes Welker might have seemed like a fleece for the Dolphins. The Pats gave up a 2nd and 7th rounder for the backup slot receiver. Well, Bill Belichick turned Wes Welker into a reliable steel trap of a target, grabbing at least 100 catches in 5 of his 6 campaigns in Foxborough. The Dolphins used their picks on Samson Sattel, a decent offensive lineman, and Abraham Wright, who never played in the NFL. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Now here's a team that doesn't make many trades. When they traded up in the 2007 NFL draft, it must have been for a good reason, right? No, the Steelers traded up 7 slots with the Packers to take punter Daniel Sepulveda. Sepulveda was talented but was often injured. He would be out of the league in 5 years and didn't actually punt much. The Packers got the 192nd overall pick, drafting serviceable linebacker Desmond Bishop, who won a Super Bowl in 2010. Over said Steelers. The New England Patriots. The Patriots are usually on the upside of trades, as you will see. So when they traded Jimmy G to the Niners, it wasn't even a bad trade because he just wasn't needed. But all the Pats got was a 2nd rounder when allegedly other teams like the Browns had offered a 1st rounder and more. The Pats took the pick that they received and drafted corner Duke Dawson, who only lasted a year in New England, while Jimmy G took the Niners to a Super Bowl. The Tennessee Titans. In 1976, the then Oilers drafted Steve Largent in the 4th round. They didn't even think he was good and they planned on cutting him, but traded him to the Seahawks for an 8th round pick. Well, safe to say they made a big mistake. Largent became arguably the greatest possession receiver of all time, holding all the records for yards, receptions, and TDs when he retired. While Largent would get inducted to the Hall of Fame, the Oilers used that pick on wideout Steve Davis, who never played in the NFL. Also, quick shout out to the A.J. Brown trade, which was pathetic. The Baltimore Ravens. A lot of people remember Kyle Bowler as being a huge draft bust, but did you know that the Ravens also traded up for him in 2003? Needing a QB after the Elvis Grbac debacle, the Ravens gave the Pats a 2nd and a 1st, and then Bowler was taken 19th overall. Bowler only made 42 career starts and sucked ass through a straw on most of them. The 2 picks, one became tight end Benny Joprue, and the other was Hall of Fame defensive tackle Vince Wilfork. So as you'll see, trading with the Pats will fork up your franchise. Carolina Panthers. Okay, so the jury is still out on Bryce Young, as he has shown flashes of ability. You cannot call him a bust yet, but really, no matter how Young turns out, there is no denying the completely unnecessary trade up for him has already cost the Panthers deeply. Fearing that some other team would take Young number 1 overall, which was absolutely untrue. David Tepper traded a first and a second in the 2023 draft, a first in 2024, and a second in 2025, along with wide receiver DJ Moore to the Bears, who absolutely balled out last year. The Panthers were left with Adam Thielen as their top target and gave Bryce Young no weapons. Oh, and that 2024 pick, because the Panthers sucked more than Mia Khalifa, it's now the first overall. The Bears' picks essentially became defensive tackle Darnell Wright and a slew of other players, and because they had so many picks, they traded a second for Montez Sweat. So maybe Bryce Young is good, but not at that cost. Buffalo Bills. Kelvin Benjamin was a guy who had all the measurables. He was a 6'5" big body wide receiver and a matchup nightmare. Unfortunately, one measurable he excelled in was calories. After 3 decent seasons, the Bills acquired Benjamin in 2017 for a third and a seventh, who became Rashawn Golden and Andre Smith. Not great players, but the Bills got next to nothing for Benjamin, who we're not even sure likes football. He was cut after 1 season in Buffalo, then was famously cut by the Giants for stealing pizza. Cincinnati Bengals. There are certain rules you follow nowadays in the draft. Don't take a running back in the top 10, and you sure as hell don't trade up for one. That's what the Bengals did in 1995 when they traded the number 5 and number 36 overall pick to the Panthers to get the number 1 overall. And they took all-time bust running back Kijana Carter. Carter would tear his ACL before he played a game in the NFL and slogged along for 8 seasons, only rushing for 1,144 yards total. The Panthers used that number 5 pick on Kerry Collins, who was decent. The Detroit Lions. Most trades have consequences regarding roster construction. This trade cursed an entire franchise. Hall of Famer Bobby Lane came to the Lions in 1950 and won 3 championships in 8 years. But after an injury, they traded him to the Steelers for Earl Morrall, who was good in Baltimore, but not Detroit. Bobby allegedly wasn't too happy about the trade, and he put a hex on the Lions. So even if they do win a Super Bowl this year or in the future, that shit seems to have worked. Jacksonville Jaguars. We all know Blaine Yo Gabba Gabbert, aka "Oh there, motherfucker," was not worth a first round pick. He was also not worth trading up for, as the Jags swapped first with the Skins and also sent them a second rounder to move up 6 slots. Jack Del Rio didn't even know they were drafting the ineffective Gabbert, and the Skins took Ryan Kerrigan at 16. The Kansas City Chiefs. Some trades are win-win, but this one kind of seemed like a lose-lose. In 2008, the Chiefs traded the 34th overall selection to the Pats for Matt Castle and a past his prime Mike Vrabel in a trade that was as meaningless as a hand job from your wife. Castle had 1 decent year in 2010, but was otherwise worthless and often injured. Vrabel retired after 1 season. The Pats turned that 34th pick into serviceable cornerback Patrick Chung. Washington Commanders. You'll notice a theme here. Trading up in the draft is a high-risk, high-reward prop, and it usually backfires. That's what happened in 2012 when the then Washington Redskins gave up 8 draft picks for Robert Griffin III, who was sensational in his rookie year, but then his ACL got shredded like pulled pork. Of the 8 picks, some were decent: Janoris Jenkins, Alec Ogletree, and Zach Stacy, and a few were borderline like Stedman Bailey and Isaiah Peed. Isaiah did what? Las Vegas Raiders. They say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. In the case of Antonio Brown, the crazy man yelled. In 2019, AB was not happy with the Steelers, so he complained until they traded him to the Raiders for a 3rd and a 5th. Then he froze his feet, called his GM a and wore a band helmet. Then Brown apologized to the team and promptly requested his release. The Raiders obliged. The Steelers turned those picks into the mercurial Deontay Johnson and tight end Zach Gentry. The Raiders got nothing. The New York Giants. The Giants actually won the Odell Beckham trade, hands down. But why it was their worst isn't for what they got, it's for what it signaled. In 2019, the Giants traded OBJ for a 1st, a 3rd, and Jabril Peppers. Though Peppers was often injured and slow as fuck, the Giants turned their picks into Dexter Lawrence and O'Shane Jimenez. Lawrence is still their best lineman. Despite the gains, the trade said that the Giants were going to suck for a long, long time, which 5 years later, they still do. New York Jets. The Jets Jets are horrible at drafting. We know that. But they are neutral when it comes to trade. In 2008, Gang Green sent stud linebacker Jonathan Vilma to the Saints for a third and a fourth rounder. Those turned into Dwight Lowry and running back Sean Green. Vilma would end up holding down the middle of a ferocious, well-incentivized defense and win a Super Bowl. The Jets would continue being the Jets, the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have had some bad trades like Kiko Alonso for Shady McCoy, but none were worse than when they traded for a QB and got nothing. In 1971, they traded to the Lions 2 seconds and a third for Greg Barton. Barton promptly signed in the CFL and never played it down for the Eagles, lasting one season north of the border. The Eagles also traded Norm Snead away, thinking they had their guy. The picks became Dave Thompson and Ken Sanders, solid NFL pros. The San Francisco 49ers. The Niners did trade for an over-the-hill, pre-canceled O.J. Simpson, but nothing can be worse than once again trading up for a QB. In 2021, the Niners gave a king's ransom to the Dolphins to move up 9 spots and draft Trey Lance. The return for the Dolphins was 3 firsts and a third. Lance was never productive in Santa Clara and was traded to the Cowboys for a 4th round pick after hitting the script club. The Dolphins got Jalen Waddle at 6 and used the picks to acquire Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. Still, somehow the Niners ended up not being fucked when they lucked out on Lozman Trophy winner Brock Purdy, whose last name means "man, my sister's hot" in West Virginia. The Seattle Seahawks. Before Deebo Samuel, there was Percy Harvin, the Vikings' versatile kick returner / wideout / guy that can line up anywhere on the field. So in 2013, the Seahawks were looking to add depth on offense, so they sent a 1st round pick to the Vikings for Harvin. Harvin was often injured, got high as shit before every game.
There's not a game I've played in that I wasn't high.
And probably didn't like football. He voluntarily sat himself and beefed with his teammates. He did run a TD back in Super Bowl 48, though it's not like the Seahawks weren't already kicking the shit out of the Broncos. Harvin lasted only 1 year in Seattle, while the Vikes took shutdown corner Xavier Rhodes, arguably the best player in the week 2013 NFL draft, the Atlanta Falcons. You know this one. The Falcons drafted Brett Favre in 1991 as the 33rd overall pick. Jerry Glanville hated him. He only threw 4 passes in Atlanta, didn't complete any except for 2 to the other team. He was shipped to Green Bay for a 1st rounder who was used on running back Tony Smith, who wasn't very good. But Favre went on to have a Hall of Fame career in stealing money from poor people to build a volleyball court for his daughter. Green Bay Packers. Speaking of the Packers, of course it's some long ago trade that most people have forgotten about. But back in 1974, the Packers hit the panic button and got themselves into one of the worst trades of all time. Dan Devine traded 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a third to the LA Rams for aging quarterback John Hadle. Hadle was rumored to be injured and was mediocre to bad as a Packer, as he was cut in 1976 after 6 TDs and 21 picks the season prior. The Rams used those picks to shore up their roster and make a Super Bowl 4 years later. The Dallas Cowboys. This one is easy. How the Cowboys did not even get a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round pick for Amari Cooper is beyond me. Them boys got 2 fifths that resulted in offensive lineman Matt Miletsko and linebacker Devin Harris. All Cleveland got was back-to-back insanely productive seasons from Cooper. Some say Dallas won the trade because they drafted CeeDee Lamb, but ask yourself if they could have used Cooper in the playoffs the last 2 years. Houston Texans, you know this one, DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson and a bag of magic beans. This was one of the worst trades ever and eventually cost Bill O'Brien his job. The Los Angeles Chargers. Everyone remembers Ryan Leaf being one of the biggest busts in NFL history, but not many people remember that the Chargers gave up a shit ton of draft capital to acquire him. In 1998, the team had the 3rd overall pick, but gave up 2 firsts, a 2nd, and 3-time Pro Bowl running back Eric Metcalf to the Cardinals to move up just 1 slot. The Cardinals drafted defensive end Andre Wadsworth, safety Corey Chavis, and wideout David Boston. The Chargers got Ryan Leaf. The Los Angeles Rams. The bus is synonymous with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but apparently he was too slow in St. Louis. Drafted by the Rams in 1993, the team saw no use for him and sent him downtown along with a 3rd rounder for a 2nd and a 4th rounder. The Rams drafted drafted tight end Ernie Conwell and ultimately got tackle Ryan Tucker. Not world beaters. Everyone involved won a Super Bowl, but the Rams missed out on one of the best, most consistent running backs of all time. The Indianapolis Colts. Most trades punish a team for 3 to 5 years. This one might have cursed an entire franchise. To be fair, John Elway did not want to play for the shitty-ass Baltimore Colts in 1983, who were coming off of a 1-win season. So even though they had the number 1 overall, they still drafted Elway and then traded him to the Broncos for offensive lineman Chris Hinton, QB Mark Herman, and a first in 1984 that became offensive lineman Ron Solt. The Broncos got John Elway, one of the greatest QBs of all time. Baltimore got left by the Colts in the middle of the night like a Tinder date post-nut. Chicago Bears. What's the theme here? Don't trade up for a QB, especially if he likes kissing titties. In 2017, the Bears were desperate for a QB. So desperate, in fact, they needed to give away draft capital for Mitch Trubisky, moving up just one slot with the 49ers team that already traded for Jimmy G. The Bears sent the 3rd overall, 2 third-rounders, and a 4th to the Niners for Trubisky in a move more unnecessary than commenting on a Cornhub video. Trubisky did win a playoff game behind a stout defense, but then once he had to play football, the Bears figured out that he sucked. The Niners turned the picks into defensive lineman Solomon Thomas, wide receiver Dante Pettis, and the absolute beast of a linebacker Fred freaking Warner. And let's never forget, Groper Cleveland and Patrick Mahomes were in the same draft and were taken much later. Denver Broncos. In 2022, the Broncos traded 3 players and 4 draft picks to ride with Corny Wilson, then immediately signed him to an outrageous contract extension.
Broncos country, let's ride.
Here's what changed hands. The Broncos got Russell Wilson. 4th round pick, Ioma Uwarzuki? I said that wrong. And then the Seahawks got Drew Lock, defensive tackle Shelby Harris, tight end Noah Fant, a 2022 first round pick who became Charles Cross, a tackle, the 2022 second round pick who became Boye Mafe, a linebacker, a 2022 fifth round pick who became linebacker Tyreek Smith, the 2023 first round pick who became Devin Witherspoon, and a 2023 second round pick who became edge rusher Derek Hall. No real world beaters yet, except the resurgent Noah Fant, but Wilson has slogged through 2 miserable seasons and was benched at the end of last year. Noah Fant, he has sucked. Cleveland Browns. Ah yes, the Groper Cleveland trade. Look, I mean, if you can just ignore the 26 allegations, it wasn't a bad trade, but combined with the contract they signed to Sharvie Watstein for, that makes it awful. In 2022, the Browns gave the Texans 3 firsts and a 3rd and a 4th. So far, these picks have been guard Kenyon Green, defensive end Will Anderson, and stud wide receiver Tank Dell. The Texans were also able to draft CJ Stroud and John Mechie and just made the playoffs. The Browns also made the playoffs, but no thanks to Deshaun Cosby, who was injured and gave way to Joe Flacco. The New Orleans Saints. What are the rules? Don't trade up for a QB and never for a running back. In 1999, Mike Ditka was so hard for Ricky Williams, he traded his entire draft for him. Yes, the Saints traded their 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks and their 1st and 3rd round picks in the following year to the Washington Redskins to move up 7 slots to number 5. The haul for the Skins was ridiculous, and if they knew how to draft, they would have turned out better. The only players of note from the 8 picks were QB Cade McNown and LeVar Arrington, but it was still a lopsided deal considering Williams only played 3 seasons in New Orleans. He was a good back, but for the Dolphins. He retired after 5 seasons to smoke weed and then came back and smoked some more weed. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Steve Young made a mistake coming out of Brigham Young. He signed with the USFL. So to correct that, he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the worst team in NFL history at the time. Look, Young was bad for the creamsicle, so in 1987 they traded him to the already QB-rich 49ers, who had Joe Montana. The Bucs got 2 picks, a 2nd and a 4th, and those turned into a linebacker named Winston Moss and a wide receiver named Bruce Hill. Young would eventually win the job in San Francisco and go on to a Hall of Fame career, winning a Super Bowl and 2 MVP awards. And finally, the worst trade in NFL history. Of course, it's the Minnesota Vikings. Herschel Walker. Thanks a lot, Minnesota. Without this trade, the Cowboys dynasty of the 90s probably doesn't happen. Look, this has been broken down before, but let's get to the aftermath. Essentially, in 1990, the Vikings traded 4 players and 8 picks to the Cowboys for running back Herschel Walker and some picks back, and somehow the Chargers were involved. I don't know. The picks the Cowboys received were turned into running back Emmitt Smith, defensive tackle Russell Maryland, cornerback Kevin Smith, safety Darren Woodson, and cornerback Clayton Holmes. They were all starters. Walker played 2.5 seasons in Minnesota and wasn't all that great. The Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls with the players I named, one of which is a Hall of Famer, and Darren Woodson damn well should be. The Vikings are still middling along and haven't been to a Super Bowl since the days of Fran Tarkenton. This was the Louisiana Purchase of trade. I'm 5 Points Vids, and you made it to my next video.